In this edition, the threats to the Caribbean's international financial services sector that make Barbados' international business minister say,
sometimes one feel used and a bit abused.
The Prime Minister of the Bahamas warns.
To destroy this sector in the Caribbean would effectively cause tens of thousands of newly empowered middle-class citizens to slip back into poverty.
One of the European diplomats to the region counters.
Please make no mistake. There is no intention on the side of the EU to paralyze the thriving financial sector of the region.
This is 6:30 on Voice of Barbados. I'm David Ellis. This segment of 6:30 comes to you in association with Sagicor.
Investing. Some see it as only for the wealthy. The way I see it, my money should work just as hard as I do. What do you see?
To achieve your goals, you need to make your money earn more. Call your Sagicor advisor and learn how to put your money to work in a Sagicor Global Balanced Fund, Select Growth Fund, and Preferred Income Fund.
You can realize your goals sooner than you think.
Sagicor, wise financial thinking for life.
That's the atmosphere on a street in Nassau in the Bahamas that's buzzing with tourists from a cruise ship. But in a conference room at a leading hotel also in Nassau, the focus is on another vital industry, one that Barbados' international business minister Ellis says doesn't get the attention that it deserves.
Most of us jump high at the word of tourism and can readily recite all of the pertinent statistics on tourism, however erroneous some of them may be. But when it comes to international business and financial services, there is but a murmur. And ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that has to change.
He began with this declaration.
Sometimes one feels used and a bit abused when you reflect on the Caribbean's undying love and support for those who now seek to impose new labels, restrictions, and penalties upon us. In our quiet moments, when we reflect on the billions of dollars being poured into formerly hostile states and some current rogue states, whilst normally peaceful, law-abiding, hard-working economies like ours are being squeezed more and more, we are left to wonder sometimes about equity and fair play in the global economic and political arena.
Minister Ellis has been prompted to speak this way because of the mounting pressure that the United States and the OECD states are putting on Barbados and other Caribbean providers of international financial services, better known as ICTs. For the past 3 days, a mix of policymakers, regulators, and finance practitioners have been meeting in Nassau. They have been attending the third Caribbean International Financial Sector Conference, jointly hosted by the government of the Bahamas and the Caribbean Export Development Agency. Senior economist with the World Bank, Sonia Varma, whose focus is on the economies of the Caribbean and Latin America, outlines the economic environment confronting most of the countries of the region at this time.
Whether you look at Jamaica, which has had an average growth of 0.5% between 2003 and 2012, or you look at some of the islands of the OECS, they've all been struggling to increase growth rates for a while now, certainly post the global financial crisis. Along with that, you have high indebtedness. This is a similar bar graph of countries' public debt to GDP levels. These are all highly indebted countries in that their debt to GDP is over 60%, which is an EU benchmark that you might be familiar with. If you look at the red bars, you see a number of Caribbean countries who occupy high rankings in the list of most heavily indebted emerging markets and developing countries. As Nicole mentioned, one of the big issues they face is very large current account deficits. The smallness of these economies and the large import concentration in their balance of payments results in a large current account deficit, which needs to be continuously financed and causes increased risk. That is coupled with poor fiscal performance in many cases. This is the debt, the public fiscal balance and the primary balance of many of the Caribbean countries. You'll see that a number of them have been running large fiscal deficits, which has also increased the whole vulnerability of the region. There are not enough cushions. If you look at reserves as a share of months of imports, many countries run reserves below the 3 months of imports, which is something economists consider a reasonable amount of foreign exchange reserves. So again, the red bars show you a number of the Caribbean countries with fairly low levels of reserves, affording less cushions to deal with economic shocks. And as many Caribbean specialists will tell you, the root of all this problem is really the issue of the large exposure to hurricanes and natural disasters, which then create periodic financing needs for reconstruction and rehabilitation. So these are really some of the common constraints that many of these economies face, maybe at different levels.
The international business and financial services sector represents either the single largest or the second largest export sector for many of our CARIFORUM member states and the wider Caribbean.
Executive Director of Caribbean Export, Pamela Koch Hamilton.
In 2011, the financial services sector accounted for 17% of GDP for the Caribbean region, and in the case of the Bahamas, our host country, it contributed 31% to GDP. A similar situation exists in several CARIFORUM countries, in particular the Barbados and also Antigua. And while in the case of the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands, international financial service exports represent almost 2/3 of government revenue. Given the significance of this sector to this region's development, it is clear that we as a regional agency must work with our stakeholders to find solutions to the myriad challenges facing this sector. The challenges this vital services export faces places us in a precarious position and affects our growth as a region. Many countries in the region have sustained their share of criticism as tax havens, which has led to a distorted and negative perception of the work undertaken in the region. Called upon to assume a more integral role in defending the interests of the regional financial sector, Caribbean Export has from the outset offered its support as it would to any other sector that generates such high levels of financial benefits for the region. As such, in addition to hosting these conferences, Caribbean Export chairs the task force for the promotion and protection of the Caribbean financial sector. There are several reasons why the task force was established, some of which include providing recommendations to the financial sector and political directorate relating to the development of the industry, in particular the development of a regional position for the sector regarding improved regulation and legislation, to establish a strategic and comprehensive regional position for coordinated lobbying and advocacy for the region's IFCs within the international fora, and to formulate a structure to highlight global best practices applicable to the region for benchmarking.
The Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Perry Christie, observed that IFCs are up against what he described as ongoing economic aggression by many of the more developed countries. He quoted from one of his own speeches he made recently before the United Nations, where he articulated his concerns on this matter.
Some have used their power either unilaterally or in small groups of high-powered nations to impose their will, arguing that there is something fundamentally immoral, something intrinsically sinister about the accumulation of wealth in offshore jurisdictions. We reject that premise, and we criticize in the strongest possible terms the efforts of some to maim and cripple, if not destroy, the offshore economies within our region. Ironically, the anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism funding, and anti-criminal regulatory regimes of many of our countries are far more robust and demonstrably far more effective than the corresponding regulatory regimes in many of the same countries that are leading the fight against us. We firmly believe that offshore financial services can be responsibly operated and regulated. We believe that the sector represents true tax competition, and in the great majority of cases, it affords an honest opportunity for families and individuals alike to protect their privacy while accumulating lawfully earned capital for themselves and for future generations. Moreover, the evidence is overwhelming that most of the investment of this offshore wealth takes place and generally benefits the developed world. Unilateralism and diplomacy by coercion are not the way the world should be dealing with this issue. Instead, we need to challenge the United Nations to take the lead in developing and refining multilateral global mechanisms for the governance of offshore financial services sectors. Mechanisms that will meet the legitimate demands of the developed world for the protection of their fiscal systems and their need for greater security, while at the same time allowing offshore financial service economies to continue to grow in an orderly and properly regulated way. And I continued, and let us not forget that the destruction of these offshore financial service economies will destabilize the countries that depend upon them for their livelihood. To destroy this sector in the Caribbean would effectively cause tens of thousands of newly empowered middle-class citizens to slip back into poverty or to migrate to the developed world. The middle class of which I speak constitutes the anchor of social stability for the countries in our region. Take that away, and social destabilization emerges as a risk of the most ominous kind. And should that risk materialize, the developed world may well end up finding that it has only solved one problem by creating an infinitely bigger one for itself, end quote.
Prime Minister Perry Christie of the Bahamas, from where we are bringing you this edition of 6:30 with the compliments of Sagicor. Coming up, we list the mounting pressures on the Caribbean.
Investing. Some see it as only for the wealthy. The way I see it, my money should work just as hard as I do. What do you see?
To achieve your goals, you need to make your money earn more. Call your Sagicor advisor and learn how to put your money to work in a Sagicor Global Balanced Fund, Select Growth Fund, and Preferred Income Fund.
You can realize your goals sooner than you think.
Sagicor, wise financial thinking for life.
We're looking at the Caribbean's response to threats to its international financial services sector. Chief Executive Officer with Cayman Finance in the Cayman Islands, Gonzalo Ellis, is of the view that IFCs have become scapegoats for politicians who've been trying to get votes in an economic climate that has been drastically changed since the financial crisis of 2008.
All this regulation will clearly act as a higher barrier of entry to smaller IFCs or new IFCs, as the cost to be compliant with the rest of the world is becoming higher and higher, and not complying or falling down or flying below the radar simply does not work. So, to put it bluntly, I think it's difficult to imagine that 10 years from now we're going to see the number of IFCs we are seeing in the different regions. It's difficult for me to imagine that in the Americas we're going to see 10 IFCs and so on, many others in Europe, Asia, and so on. The reality is we are likely to see consolidation. The new model clearly is transparency, and if one goes through many of the discussions like BEPS, which I strongly recommend that if anybody hasn't read in detail, you do, it's clear that in the end, we are going to one common vision, which is substance over form. It is clear that the only way this is going to work is if substance can be demonstrated, and the requirements are going to be higher and higher. So I think the new paradigm is less volume of business in a way that the IFCs need to extract more value out of them. The days of having hundreds of banks registered without any activity, I think they're gone. There still are reasons for them to exist in a few countries, but it's a matter of time till they disappear, in my opinion.
The Barbados ambassador to the United States and the OAS, John Beale, brings it down to what he calls a power game.
Make no bones about it. Powerful countries, is my belief, intend to get the offshore sector, or the tax havens as they're called, out of business. That is as simple as that. You're meant to go out of business. And one way to get you out of business is to regulate you out of business. So I think that that's not going to stop. The U.S. clearly wishes to collect more taxes. The lady from Isle of Man yesterday, I believe she said, or was it this morning? This morning, actually. In my opinion, she's absolutely correct. I mean, in fact, FACTA is the most outrageous thing I think that one could ever imagine. How some country can impose legislation on the entire world, bypassing governments and going straight to the financial center and ask them to report. And if they don't, they'll be fined. I mean, that is really quite an amazing feat. But guess what? Power is power, because you don't have much of a choice in that. The thing about it, though, is rather ironic, is that, I think it's quite smart. I must say that's quite intelligent, that the United States probably doesn't need to have such an efficient inland revenue once you have all these countries working for them. I mean, I think it's pretty smart.
He adds,
what I'd like to make clear, though, is that while IFCs are clearly under threat, I'm also convinced that IFCs will continue, because there's a thing called human nature. And I am convinced that human beings with human nature, if they can pay less taxes, in many cases, they will try to pay less taxes. So because of that, I'm convinced that the offshore sector will continue. The problem, though, is that the standards are going to be increased, and the level of ability to stay in the game is going to be raised, and there's no question in my mind that a lot of players will just simply be passed aside. They'll just fall away. But that's the survival of the fittest, really. And in the Caribbean terms, I was talking to someone earlier today. I'm not sure how many financial centers we even have, but if I had to make a guesstimate, a few years down the road, I wouldn't expect to see more than about 4 surviving. That's just the law of the land.
Please make no mistake. There is no intention on the side of the EU to paralyze the thriving financial sector of the region with the burden of regulation and control, as some want to maliciously insinuate.
EU Ambassador to Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, and the Cayman Islands, Paulo Amadi.
There is rather the genuine concern of true partners to help prevent the infiltration of criminal activities in legitimate business on one side, and to capture resources for countries' development by allowing equitable taxation on the other. The spirit of partnership which inspired the Cotonou Agreement, which is the main pillar of the Caribbean-EU relation, it's also pervading our cooperation in this area. In the course of the conference, we will have the opportunity to hear more from high-level experts on global and Caribbean perspective. I look forward to it. I sincerely hope also that in the discussion we will not forget that we all share a common goal, which is to promote inclusive and sustainable growth for our citizens. This will not be possible without a sound, vibrant, and law-abiding financial sector.
But what are the specific threats to the international financial services sector? Ben Arundel, Deputy Chairman of a company called Sidel Bank and Trust, lists them for us.
I think certainly one of the major issues is to do with regulation. And as many speakers said during the course of the conference, over-regulation. So as international financial centers, we are required to comply with international standards in a number of areas. In terms of supervision and regulation of financial services, whether it's banking, insurance, all types of financial services. We are subject to reviews by the Financial Action Task Force through the Caribbean arm of that, which is the CFADF, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. And those reviews are quite comprehensive. The rules have become more and more complex, I would say, over the last 10 years. They are now so complex that it is very difficult for a small IFC to easily comply with those rules. In order to do that, you have to have not just the regulation on your books, but you also have to have staff who have the experience to be able to implement these rules and to properly regulate. And that is an issue for small IFCs in having the resources, both the human resources and the financial resources, to be able to do that and to do that effectively. The other pressure would be that, of course, you are assessed on your performance. And if you fail those assessments, then that has reputational issues in terms of reputational risk. And if you're seen as being non-compliant, you could be blacklisted, so that your financial institutions might find it difficult to conduct business with banks in the so-called onshore jurisdictions, which makes it very difficult then for them to operate. So there is that risk. There is also the risk that you could lose business because investors lose confidence in your jurisdiction as an international financial center. I think another major challenge that we have is the initiative launched by the OECD, which is the Initiative on Transparency and Exchange of Information. That has also taken up resources, scarce resources, or resources of small IFCs in negotiating tax information agreements. For example, the Bahamas, I think, have said that they've negotiated 30 agreements. Now, the amount of time and effort that it takes to do that. The other thing, of course, is that the Global Forum have a system where they assess countries. And if you're a part of the Global Forum, and you have a phase 1 assessment that looks at your legislation, whether you have legislation in place to enable you to exchange information. And then the second phase deals with how do you actually exchange information, how effective are you as a jurisdiction in exchanging information with your tax information with your treaty partners. Now, those assessments are extremely time-consuming. I think even the U.S. representative said that when they went through their phase 2 assessment, it took up a lot of time and resources, and it was a very painful exercise. In small IFCs, we have very scarce resources to deal with that. In some of the IFCs that are not taxing jurisdictions, they do not have the infrastructure. They've had to put the infrastructure in place in order to be able to comply with these tax information exchange agreements. So that is another significant move. When you put that together with the FATF and all of the other things that have been happening, and during the global financial crisis, all our countries have gone through severe financial constraints. Some countries are on an IMF program, so they then have, during the course of the year, they may have the CFATF coming in to do a review. They then have the IMF coming in to do a review. They may have the Global Forum assessment team coming in to do a review. During the course of the year, that will take up a significant amount of time of very scarce government resources.
Lawyer in the Bahamas, Linda Beidler de Aguilar, considers that there's an underlying view of the region that seems to inform why the Caribbean is under so much pressure from the more developed countries.
There's certainly the view that the only reason that anyone would be in the Caribbean is to evade taxes. I think that is so wholly erroneous and so simplistic that it's almost offensive. There are many persons and many businesses who have established relationships with Caribbean service providers for reasons that have nothing whatsoever to do with the evasion of taxes. It may have to do with privacy, and it may have to do with confidentiality, but it is very often not driven in any shape or form by their tax circumstances in their home country. And I think one of the most difficult things for us in the Caribbean to handle is this demonization of our clients who in many, many instances don't deserve it and oughtn't to be treated that way. I mean, certainly the one thing that we've noticed domestically, the Ministry of Financial Services, as I mentioned, has had to not only engage in educational initiatives, but they themselves, in terms of the negotiation of the intergovernmental agreement, the IGA, for FATCA, have had to come up to speed themselves, have had to spend enormous amounts of time on that IGA. Whenever we have any of the other bodies who come traipsing through, everyone has to put down whatever work they're doing and focus on that. And what happens is that important domestic initiatives and important international initiatives that don't have to do with tax or with FATCA tend to get pushed aside, not because they are in any fundamental sense less important, but because the pressure on our government is such that they have to focus on these initiatives.
And from Antigua and Barbuda.
Althea Crick, chairperson of the Financial Services Regulatory Commission. The government has been very proactive in firstly recognizing that these challenges are challenges that have to be faced in a very aggressive manner, if you will. They're not seen or taken lightly, and consequently, limited though the resources are, financial especially, the government has taken a deliberate decision to ensure that our infrastructure in terms of regulation is well developed. I noted my colleague here mentioned the fact that training, the development of human resources is quite a large investment. The same thing is happening at the Financial Services Regulatory Commission. So there's a complete overhaul of that regulatory regime. The idea being that as we recognize that these challenges are here to stay and probably will increase, we need to be ready if we want to stay active, to be major players in the sector. We need to be ready to face those challenges. So it's human resource development, and it is development of the infrastructure to deliver the kind of regulatory regimes and legislation to support a positive and vibrant regime going forward.
Ben Arundel, what is your own assessment of how Caribbean countries have responded individually and collectively to this situation?
I think to some extent, I think we have been slow to respond. I think the initiative that was started through the Antiguan government intervention, and also CARIFORUM having taken up the battle and asked Caribbean Export Development Agency to form a task force to coordinate the responses of the Caribbean region. I think that was a great initiative. I think we have been a little bit slow in really getting the initiative going in terms of implementation and action, and I think that this conference will galvanize that action. I think after this conference we will see there is a meeting tomorrow of the task force to discuss our action plan and to set some timelines in terms of dealing with issues to do with advocacy, issues to do with research, to try to anticipate what are the other challenges that are coming our way, so that we can be better prepared next time to be able to have input into the issues as opposed to being reactive.
Coming up, there was a lot of talk about FATCA in the Bahamas. We'll hear more on this edition of 630, brought to you in association with Sagicor.
When people see retirement, they see activities like knitting or bingo. But me, I see great adventures like traveling the world. What do you see?
Dreaming can be like seeing the future when you have the right financial partner. At Sagicor, we have savings and investment solutions, including our Millennium Saver, life insurance and annuity plans to help you enjoy your retirement. Call one of our Sagicor advisors today.
I hear NASA's doing commercial flights to the moon.
Sagicor, wise financial thinking for life.
One of the newer obstacles with which IFCs in the Caribbean are having to grapple is the American legislation better known as FATCA.
My name is Candace Ewell, and I'm a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I think what I'm going to do with my little time here, I'm going to just kind of set up what FATCA is so that we're all kind of playing from the same general understanding about what FATCA is looking to do. The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act was enacted about 4 years ago, almost 4 years to the day. And we've spent the last 4 years trying to figure out exactly what it is that we're supposed to do and what it is that FATCA is. And what FATCA asks is it asks that foreign financial institutions that are non-U.S. financial institutions to do information reporting when it is that they locate in their account records Americans or persons who look to be Americans. And short of doing that and not being able to locate those parties or to find parties that are a little less cooperative, it also asks that they impose 30% withholding on certain payments if folks are not forthcoming with information about whether or not they're an American or someone else. If those non-U.S. financial institutions choose not to share the information with the IRS and Department of Treasury, then the ask is that others that are making U.S. source payments to those financial institutions take 30% and send it to the IRS, and then at the end of the year, they can go figure out how to get the money back if they're so entitled. Right? It sounds very intrusive, sounds very a bit overwhelming, and I think it also kind of sounds a little bit simple, I hope, in the way that I described it. But FATCA was meant to try to help detect and deter Americans from evading tax. As some of you may know, Americans are subject to tax on their worldwide income no matter where it is that they sit. So if I were to choose to move to the Bahamas, which would be a nice little adventure, I would still be subject to tax in the U.S. And I think that idea right there is something that often is not very common in other jurisdictions, where most jurisdictions tax based on where it is that you reside. Because the U.S. has this worldwide taxing activity, it came to be known that there were some Americans who found their money in locations that were not inside the U.S. and chose not to report it on their income tax return, and that became a problem, right, for members of Congress, because it's important that people comply with their tax obligations, right? Okay. And so in an effort to try to tamp down that kind of behavior, FATCA was enacted, and arguably it's very overly broad and overly intrusive.
Mr. Charles Intriago. Charles is the founder and president of the Association of Certified Financial Crimes Specialists, which is located in Miami. He's also a former U.S. federal prosecutor and a former counsel to a U.S. congressional committee in Washington.
It is, and I'm no apologist for the United States government, even though I worked for it for some years. I'm not an apologist for them, but it was not the United States government and its imperial tendencies that enacted FATCA and said, let's make those foreign institutions tell us which one of our taxpayers are holding accounts over there. Let's not forget, and I'll name names, and I don't mean to, this was in the headlines. I'm not picking on any institution, but it was in 2008, it was the UBS scandal that emerged that, according to a Senate committee in Washington, had held 52,000 accounts of wealthy U.S. citizens that were being hidden from the Internal Revenue Service. That caused an outrage in Congress, and the Congressional Committee, the Senate Committee, said this is outrageous. And just to do the numbers, if only 20,000 of those 52,000 had the minimum balance that we understand was required by that bank of $5 million, you're talking about $100 billion just held by those by those 20,000 people. So now that scandal has gone over to Credit Suisse, and there were about 11 other Swiss banks under investigation for more or less the same thing. So it wasn't the U.S. that hammered this law home. It was rather the conduct of these taxpayers in collusion with financial institutions that led to that law. And I'm not picking on the institutions. I'm just clarifying the facts. Now, what happened was interesting, that after the United States enacted FATCA in March 2010, it's been now exactly 4 years, and it had been delayed and delayed and delayed at the urging of the financial institutions because of the serious compliance problems. Now, all of a sudden, the OECD, the G20 nations, have said, you know, we like FATCA. We think it's a great idea. In fact, Mexico said, we don't think it goes far enough. We want more of this because our treasuries are bare and we need to capture that tax revenue that is being lost through this tax evasion. So that's really what happened in this situation. I can't foretell, as important as that law is, I cannot foretell what the consequences will be. Whether we're seeing the end, or as Winston Churchill said, it's not the beginning of the end, it's the end of the beginning. I don't know if we're seeing the end of financial secrecy, bank secrecy in some of the places around the world, some 60 secrecy havens as they're called. Whether we're starting to see the end of that because of the penalties that they will suffer from not cooperating with the provisions of these laws like FATCA, or whether the loss of business to institutions is going to be dramatic to the point where some of them go under, or where people who want to hide their money are going to hide it. Now, I know there are a lot of legitimate reasons for people to hold accounts in other countries, so I don't want to besmirch any financial center by any means. And I know there are legitimate reasons to hold them, but there are some that are not going to be legitimate. And what I say to you is that for those of you who are affiliated with any institutions outside the United States, it's a good idea to be sure that what you're submitting to the Internal Revenue Service in the United States government is accurate, because they have lots of ways they can make life uncomfortable for you. And I'm not here to utter their threats or do anything of the sort, but rather to state the facts as I know they can be. They will evolve. It's interesting that the first line in the law, in the FATCA law, the first line by Congress in leading to the provisions of the law was that this is aimed at determining who the beneficial owners are of accounts. And that's really what's at the heart of this, to find out who the beneficial owners are of money that is held overseas. So that's what the Congress set as its goal. And the other goal, of course, that they seek, they say, is to obtain and reach corporate transparency.
Just want to clarify one point that I may have made, or maybe you misunderstood. While I completely I'm convinced that FATCA is morally repugnant, my thing was more along the lines of, I appreciate that we have to move towards an exchange of information, but why are we having a FATCA one alongside a GATCA one, essentially? Why don't we just have one mechanism, particularly for small jurisdictions like ourselves, who have limited resources? So if we can put one robust arrangement in place that is completely reciprocal, reciprocity as in contained in the Oxford definition of reciprocal, and
I agree
for that.
I agree with you, but the dilemma is that the United States Congress passed this law in March of 2010, and it was not for a couple of years until other jurisdictions began to see that they wished to follow in those footsteps. And now what needs to be done on a diplomatic basis is through some forum, maybe the Financial Action Task Force or some other forum, the United Nations even, is reach a multilateral agreement that establishes the more efficient system that you're talking about. I agree.
And that's fine, and I think we can still do that because we've had various delays of FATCA. So I think that there is still opportunity for that to have happened if there was a sincere approach. But we can argue that after the Q&A session. I think we can move on to our last speaker on the panel for now, and I think probably His Excellency John Beale, who is the Barbados' ambassador and the OAS's to Washington. We're delighted that John could also join us at such short notice. John?
Thank you, and I can just tell the former speaker there's one easy way of solving the FATCA problem. Congress can repeal it.
And from Antigua and Barbuda, you are?
Althea Crick, chairperson of the Financial Services Regulatory Commission.
How do you see a small country like Antigua and Barbuda coping with the challenges that have been identified here?
Well, the government has been very proactive in firstly recognizing that these challenges are challenges that have to be faced in a very aggressive manner, if you will. They're not seen or taken lightly, and consequently, limited though the resources are, financial especially, the government has taken a deliberate decision to ensure that our infrastructure in terms of regulation is well developed. I noted my colleague here mentioned the fact that training, the development of human resources is quite a large investment. The same thing is happening at the Financial Services Regulatory Commission. So there's a complete overhaul of that regulatory regime. The idea being that as we recognize that these challenges are here to stay and probably will increase, we need to be ready if we want to stay active, to be major players in the sector. We need to be ready to face those challenges. So it's human resource development, and it is development of the infrastructure to deliver the kind of regulatory regimes and legislation to support a positive and vibrant regime going forward.
Notwithstanding the significant challenges facing the international financial services sector, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Perry Christie, is among those holding the view that the region has to take steps to protect the viability of the sector. Identifying education as one of the key requirements, he also brought to the fore a clear struggle between Barbados and the Bahamas for the hosting of a new research institute that they believe the sector really needs.
The leading index of financial centers, the Global Financial Centers Index, published by Zen and Long Finance, uses 5 factors to rank the competitiveness of financial centers. A, business environment. B, financial sector development. C, infrastructure. D, human capital. And reputational and general factors. The study draws from the widest possible range of other studies and indices to derive its rankings. While some may, perhaps even some in this room, may challenge or question the statistical methodology behind the study, for example, how much weighting of particular factor or does not bear on the results, I think that it is fair to say that the factors which are identified by the study appear to be very reasonable and should be instructive for this region's policymakers. Indeed, the results are instructive for regional international financial service centers, and the release of the report certainly garners much attention by all regional IFCs. For my analysis this morning on the making of a great international financial center, I will draw on an alternative but related framework. It is my belief that the countries which will continue to do well in financial services are those which fosters creativity and innovation. while allowing them to flourish in an environment of economic, political, and social stability. Professor Richard Florida, the director of the Martin Prosperity Institute at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, and other urban economists have spent the last 10 years or so discussing this idea of the need for creativity in the growth of cities and economies. Creative or innovative places grow and develop. Places that stifle creativity do not. Indeed, in the Bahamas, we are of the firm belief that the future of financial services is not just in the efficient and effective provision of services, such as ensuring that we have fast turnaround times or that we are cost efficient. No, the future of the financial services sector also relies on creativity and innovation. Therefore, my thesis, ladies and gentlemen, is that the making of a great financial services center involves the process of ensuring that your services-based economy works well, while also ensuring that your economy supports creativity and innovation. So what do we need to do, or in most cases continue to do, to ensure that financial centers in the region continue to emerge as great centers? Our discussion, therefore, must include our labor markets, because the future of our centers relies on having a sufficient number of high-quality financial services professionals with the depth and breadth of skills needed for modern, innovative financial services industry. The Caribbean, consisting of mostly middle-income and some high-income countries, has a strong history of well-developed educational systems which are open to all. Education spending is a leading budget item for many countries, if not all, in our region. I know this is certainly the case for the Bahamas. However, rather than measuring inputs, the modern world requires that we measure output. In 2010, Dr. Jules, Registrar and CEO of the Caribbean Examination Councils, writing on the topic, and I quote, "Rethinking Education in the Caribbean," end quote, a paper appearing on the CXE's website, stated that although we spend as much or more on education than many of the developed countries, performance is not commensurate to that investment. The recent, and just a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, in another contribution to prime ministers of the region, he began his speech by saying the context is the systemic failure of our educational system in the region. So it is a matter that we should pay very close attention to. The recent publications on our educational systems, both in the world, by the World Bank and the Jules study, appear to show that there is a need to improve the polar ends of our educational system so that we can continue to grow. And by that I mean we must bolster early childhood education so that our children are better prepared for the learning experiences of primary and secondary education. Secondly, we must also improve at the tertiary and professional levels to ensure that a sufficient number of our citizens have the necessary skills to perform well and to think critically on the job. Financial services training and research, a mechanism to address quantity, depth, and breadth, which now I wish to address. According to various experts, where firms locate are a result of a complex interplay of factors, including 1, luck, the luck factor, like the geographic proximity to clients and important markets. 2, policy factors such as how easy it is to do business in a country and the quality of your infrastructure, an area which I will address later. And most importantly, 3, the availability of skilled local talent. And so, ladies and gentlemen, one of the themes that I wish to leave you with today is the need for continued action by our respective governments towards a strategic human development policy within our various countries and regionally. Countries in this hemisphere, and I'm talking about both the Caribbean and Latin American countries, must address this phenomenon known as the skills gap, because these gaps directly constrain what we can do generally and how we compete for mobile capital. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of the Bahamas is not prepared to sit idly by with respect to addressing any real or perceived skills gap in the Bahamas. Therefore, I have directed the Minister of Financial Services to work with all relevant institutions within the Bahamian government and outside of the government to ensure that Bahamians are ready for the changing realities in the financial services sector. The Ministry of Financial Services, in concert with various public and private sector institutions, has been mandated to devise policy on the issue of ensuring that deep and wide skills exist in the Bahamas financial services sector market. One of the ministry's programs is the formation within the Bahamas of a Center of Excellence for Financial Services Training and Research. I have directed Minister Pinder to make achieving this distinction a priority for the ministry. The Bahamas has had for over 30 years, through a public-private partnership, a high-quality professional financial services training institute, the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services, and formerly the Bahamas Banking Institute. This institute has established a dense network of relationships with the major international professional accrediting bodies for all areas of financial services, and has been playing a key role in the professional development of a major share of financial services professionals in the country. I now understand that the Institute has expanded its reach to the Turks and Caicos Islands also. This institute, combined with the work of the Business School of the College of the Bahamas, which is soon to be the University of the Bahamas, continues to ensure that the Bahamas can supply a high number of skilled professionals to our sector. Our singular goal, ladies and gentlemen, is to ensure that our region continues to develop and has the ability to develop from within the sufficient quantity and quality of financial services professionals to ensure that our economies remain attractive for international financial intermediaries to locate here and for local indigenous intermediaries to grow effectively.
Barbados' International Business Minister Donville Innes spoke to the issue at a luncheon the following day.
The reality about it is that Bahamas have done their research. Barbados has done its research, I think, with the Frankfurt School of Business and others. Hugo and others have done, and the EU have helped us a lot. You see, but had Barbados and Bahamas been talking, had the minister and I been going to the same discotheque and having a conversation, we would not be at this point today. But what is important, though, is that we have good ideas. Yes. And we're not going to cast anyone out. No. I think what we're going to do is sit down, right, Minister? We have a commitment to sit down and work out how we're going to move forward. Yes. Well, I am not leaving Bahamas until we work this out. And I'm not missing my flight on Thursday either. Well, Antigua can always referee. But the truth of the matter, serious, is that we've all accepted in this room that there is need for facilities to provide that level of training and continuing professional education. At the end of the day, just like those who are lawyers and doctors and accountants, this region has nothing that is more valuable to it than its reputation. And that reputation can only be enhanced by having competent individuals servicing this very important sector. And we are seeking to move to the next level as a regional initiative. It's not the Bahamas initiative. Don't say there's a Barbados initiative. It's what we have to do as a region. Now, of course, I like to start with everything done in Barbados, but we have to compromise a bit occasionally. And therefore, when the minister colleague and myself and others, the Caribbean Export, and you representing Ball and Spice, Antigua, and others, and we have minister here from Dominica, representing from St. Lucia, St. Vincent. At the end of the day, this must be seen as a regional initiative because people will benefit in the region.
In the body of his speech, Minister Ellis expressed the view that the Caribbean has to take IFCs far more seriously.
The Caribbean region has been sitting back, moaning and groaning as economic body blows were being inflicted upon us in the name of tax avoidance, tax evasion, and all the new terms being bandied about today. Now, I dare say that the occasional muscular language which comes in response will no longer be the primary solution. We have to be there at the table where the rules of engagement are being drafted. Whether there be membership in bodies, stronger lobbying prior to decisions being made, or any other forms of constructive engagement, this region has to do better at being on the front end of discussions around international business and financial services. We have to plan for such. We can no longer sit back and just respond. Let us therefore be more proactive going forward. Therefore, I wish to place on the table today that we gathered here formally mandate Caribbean Export to coordinate the regional dialogue and response on international business and financial services matters. We must move beyond a task force and firmly establish a secretariat to serve the needs of the region's international financial centers. It must be a secretariat that is well-resourced financially and human resource-wise. And let us not, as a first response, start to worry about where the money will come from. We can easily look around this region and see the monies being wasted on all sorts of talk shops, think tanks, studies, and centers. Ideas and activities that are more based sometimes on satisfying the egos of a select few than on anything else of substance. Financial services sector will be the one to help save our economies and quickly generate the levels of revenue to guarantee a high standard of living for our people. Now, I know that there will be a rush to ask foreign donors to open their wallets and help us. And let me not stop anyone from donating, ambassadors. However, we in this region have to seriously start to earn our own way in life. This sector earns billions for this region, and hence we need to reinvest some of our own resources in developing the international business and financial services sector. Now, I am not one of those politicians that like to make very grand statements and bland promises. And my friends from Barbados here can attest to that and how quickly it lands me in trouble. But I therefore expect that by June 30th, 2014, all ministers responsible for international financial centers in this region will receive the first draft of a business plan for the establishment of a secretariat located within Caribbean Export to serve the needs of the region's IFCs. And we must endeavor to have this secretariat in place by the time we meet for our 4th IFC conference in Barbados next year. One would expect that this secretariat will engage in meaningful research, be the focal point for advocacy, advise on major policy matters, assist in setting standards for our IFCs, and engaging with external stakeholders on relevant matters, among other mandates. And of course, I expect that this will include the work of CARICOM Secretariat. Furthermore, we must commit to there being ministerial meetings at both CARICOM and CARIFORUM levels on financial services within the international business and financial services context. IFC matters are too important for our regional economic and social development for it to be discussed on the margins of other people's meetings. For those states that may think that IFC matters are not relevant to their economies and hence may believe that they have no place at these meetings, they must still rethink their policies. For example, if Barbados is not earning the $400 million per year that we're earning from international business, then we will not be in a position to buy the goods and services from our neighboring islands who think currently that IFCs is not their business. The reality about it is that all of us in this region must recognize the potential of international financial services to our economies. Second point I wish to stress on relates to public engagement. I submit that we are guilty of continuing to make international business and financial services seem like some secret order that is reserved for the domain of a privileged few who assist international clientele with tax planning and cross-border transactions. It is time that we demystify international business and financial services and obtain further buy-in from our citizens across the region. It is time that we speak in a language, in a manner, and with a frequency that appeals to the average person. Without a thriving international business and financial services sector, many of us could not provide the necessary law and order, health systems, educational programs, or infrastructural projects throughout some parts of this region. Quite frankly, it is this sector that pays the bills for most of our economies. The interesting thing is, though, unlike tourism or manufacturing, international business and financial services is far more resilient and takes a lot less investment to grow and sustain it. What is more remarkable is that this sector does not take anything away from tourism or manufacturing. It actually further complements them. Now, I know that I'm speaking to the converted here, but sometimes we need to remind ourselves of these benefits. We must also continue to exemplify the linkages between international business and financial services and other parts of our economy, such as tourism, industry, technology transfer, general business development, real estate development, and governance issues, to name a few. But we cannot talk with ourselves on these issues. We have to be much more engaging with the public. That is why I'm very pleased to note the presence of the regional media at this conference, thanks to Caribbean Export once again. We have not often been very kind to our regional media houses, and oftentimes forget their importance in getting the message across in a fair and balanced manner, and there too crave for knowledge on this very vital sector. Too often we invite the media to come and to listen to politicians speak, take photos of our powdered noses, and then we shoo them out of the room. We need our media houses to be on board as our partners, particularly in the educational program. Third area I wish to speak on quickly relates to investment. Another area of concern which I have is the amount of funds we invest in developing, promoting, and sustaining this very vital sector, as I said earlier. Too often, governments in the region are not putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to the international business and financial services sector. Whilst I remain quite happy about the fact that this sector is private sector led, and long may it remain that way, one cannot help but recognize the low level of state investment in the sector. Investments have to be made in the areas of product development, international negotiations, marketing, legislative reform, service level issues, data collection and analysis, and with all general regulatory matters. Now, while the EU and others have helped us as well, and we are indeed eternally grateful, we must have a vision and mission to become much more independent in developing this industry. We must, of course, develop or evolve a general partnership with the EU and others, but we need to be a little bit more independent. Fourth point I wish to stress on relates to competition or collaboration. And one of the burning issues which we have to confront is the need for the Caribbean region to collaborate more on international business and financial services matters, and not to just focus on the purely competitive issues. Each one of us may develop areas of specialty, and sometimes we may be offering similar products. Competition is healthy, but if we in this region focus on the small issues, then we may miss out on the bigger picture. We must not allow others to divide and rule us. We must stand up like big men and women and lead from in front on international business and financial services matters in a very collaborative manner. My own vision is that the Caribbean region must emerge as the premier location for international business and financial services within a well-regulated system, very competent human resource, and a safe and secure environment. And I'm satisfied that we are on our way to achieving this, in spite of all of the economic missiles being shot our way occasionally. However, there is no room for complacency or despondency. We have lots of work to do. One area of cooperation and collaboration resides in our desire to develop and sustain regional institutions and institutes for international business and regulation, as well as centers of excellence in financial services. Now, both the Bahamas and Barbados have publicly committed to the creation of such. Now is the time for the two of us and others to work together to achieve such institutions for the benefit of the region. From our end down south in Barbados, we've committed to build upon the solid foundation laid by the UWI, the diversity of products in the sector, the wealth of intellect, and some may actually say the sheer wealth that's available as faculty, our vision of the sector. We have all these things which will combine to build out and sustain an Institute for International Business and Financial Services located in UWI. But like my colleague here in the Bahamas and Prime Minister Christie, such facilities are critical for our development and sustainability of our well-resourced and regulated international financial services sector. Our immediate task is to forge ahead in a collaborative manner. The establishment of relevant training facilities in the region, catering to IFCs, must be done in a manner that we all contribute and we all benefit. I look forward to the details of such initiatives being rolled out over the next few weeks, particularly as us ministers and advisors sit together over the next couple of hours and start the process.
After all the talk in the Bahamas at this third conference on the international financial services sector in the Caribbean, what are the outcomes? Well, a news conference was held by the organizers to spell out the way forward.
Thank you. We just want to be able to make what we think is a groundbreaking statement that has full cooperation of all the ministerial responsible for financial services here at this conference. that we think lays the groundwork for fundamental reform and advancement of the industry. I'll read the statement. Again, my name's Ryan Pinder, Minister of Financial Services for the Bahamas. Then I'll allow my colleagues to make a statement to that effect, and then if the press had any questions. The University of the West Indies and the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services have agreed to work together towards the establishment of the Caribbean Center of Excellence for Financial Services. Based upon over 3 decades of experience in providing professional certification and expertise in the financial services sector, the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services is eminently placed to provide the level of international credibility to the center's offerings. This, in conjunction with the internationally recognized brand of the University of the West Indies, places the region in an extremely advantageous position to strengthen and advocate on behalf of a sector so critical to the region's overall economic development. Ministers in attendance at the 3rd Caribbean Conference on the International Financial Services Sector, held in Nassau, Bahamas from March 31st to April 2nd, fully endorsed this agreement as the way forward for the establishment of the proposed Center of Excellence. In that vein, I must say I'm very proud of the collaboration and the agreement and the vision and common goal of all of those from the region represented here at this conference to cause this to happen. We know that Barbados, certainly, and the University of West Indies has historically been very active in coordinating this, and we know that here in the Bahamas, through our institutes, we've been very active as well. And to be able to bring our talents and our cooperation, our coordination to a regional level to where we can leverage and expose the entire region in financial services for human capital development within the industry certainly is a paramount goal of the region, of CARICOM, of CARIFORUM, through the leadership and direction of Caribbean Export Development Agency. So for me, I'm very proud to be able to make this announcement today.
My name is David Ellis from Voice of Barbados. I need to get a little bit more specifics on what you mean by working together, these two educational institutions working together. What does that mean? And how are you going to go about funding this particular institution?
Well, we envision that the expertise of both institutions and, frankly, other institutions in the region who would like to be a part of the Center of Excellence would coordinate offerings of curriculum, whether it be at the tertiary level to form the foundational base for our students in the region. And certainly that's where the expertise and sophistication of the University of West Indies, who has a broad reach through the region, extends. But we also look to offer certificate programs and accreditation programs at the professional level, because in many of our countries, and I'm sure the Minister and the Ambassador would agree, as the industries evolve, those who are working in the industries from our respective countries might have to fill certain gaps in their skill base to be able to remain competitive and to remain growing within the industry in the respective countries and throughout the entire region, in fact, and to be able to offer the professional programs as well and extend the reach of what, for instance, the Bahamas Institute has been doing domestically throughout the whole region, and bringing that expertise, I think, is a fundamental element. Now, to the question about who is going to fund it, well, certainly we will look to a variety of sources. Those that we can, offerings within the University of the West Indies program, which is based throughout the entire Caribbean in many countries, the infrastructure exists. With respect to other cost elements, certainly we have been speaking and have cooperation, we think, with the European Union in helping to help mature that as well. Cost in this region, as everybody knows, is always a challenge, but we have the commitment, as you can see, on a unified front to pursue that.
Minister Pinder was asked, how soon will the Institute become a reality?
Well, that is going to be part of a planning committee that we put in place immediately upon the conclusion of this conference, that will have representatives from relative entities in to map out the strategic plan. There's been some work done with the University of West Indies prior where there's a strategy report in place. We would build on the work that's been done, incorporate some of the new and evolving vision that's happened over the last couple of years into it, and hopefully be in a position in very short term to be able to broaden the offering base of curriculum throughout the entire region, utilizing, at least in the initial point, the current infrastructure. And if we could allow Dr. Marshall to comment from the University of West Indies perspective.
We are extremely happy to ground this project because I can tell you that as someone that worked with the University of West Indies Strategic Plan 2012 to 2017, one of the commitments that we had was to do further work in providing institutional and research support into the activities of our international financial centers. As you would well recognize, for too long it's been an underthought, under-researched area. The Institute in Bahamas has been busy conducting work in the direction of training persons and so on, and while the University of West Indies has also been serving the region well in relation to the building up skills, whether it's a question of legal skills, management skills, fiduciary skills, and so on. We have not paid enough attention as a university into producing knowledge and sufficient knowledge that would assist in defending the sector, setting quality benchmarks, and beginning to respond in a much more proactive way to the kinds of pressures that we are faced as we are asked to undertake a treadmill of ever-changing regulations. So the University of West Indies is happy to embark on this project. Clearfield campus in particular is the point campus that is taking the lead in this direction. But understand that with the open campus, with the other two campuses, Monash and Augustine, and Clearfield campus, and together with the online platforms that we have established in the last 2 years, we are just about fit for purpose and ready to assist with research, teaching, training, and so on in conjunction with our brothers and sisters across the region, including the Bahamas. When it comes to the question of delivering, say, master's degrees and courses that will build on what takes place already in the Bahamian Institute, we are fully capable of delivering this online. But the modalities of that will be discussed afterwards. But we have the platform and the faculty in place.
One journalist wanted to know how much regional consensus has there been among the governments about this institute.
I had the privilege in St. Vincent, right before the heads of government meeting of CARICOM, to chair COFAP. And one of the high items on the agenda was the development of human capital within financial services. And it was certainly approved with consensus of all governments at the COFAP level with respect to that mandate to develop human capital in financial services. I just so happened to be also on COTED, the trade ministers, and Ambassador Henry could tell you that this issue has risen at the COTED level as well with respect to the development of human capital. And also at the CARIFORUM level of ministers, the last ministerial meeting, the development of human capital and financial services was a agreed item of high priority by consensus. So when you ask which governments endorse this, at every single possible committee level of government in the region, it has been endorsed in some form or fashion by consensus.
Having reached broad agreement on creating a Caribbean Center of Excellence for Financial Services, the details now have to be hammered out. But there's also the idea of a secretariat to be located within Caribbean Export to look after the needs of the international financial services sector. One point of view has been that they should look to the regional private sector to assist with funding. But Dr. Don Marshall of the University of the West Indies wants to know.
When we talk about the private sector, as we do international financial services, we are really talking about a coterie of professionals and their organizations assisting and facilitating business for non-resident clientele. So how do we leverage contributions from under this nebulous category called private sector to help fund what we do?
Sure. Ben wanted to attack first, and then Nicola, you can go after. Sure, Ben, go ahead.
I mean, I can't speak for other countries, but certainly in the case of Barbados, there is a Barbados International Business Association, which is the association of the private sector service providers to the international financial services industry. And it's that body that I would see in Barbados that we would first of all engage with. And to the extent that we can persuade them to come on board, I mean, they can have an outreach to the wider private sector, if you like, because from my experience of fundraising in Barbados, whether it's for international business or anything else, that there are private sector entities who are not engaged in international financial services who see the benefits of that to their particular companies and are prepared to put their hands in their pockets and contribute. But I think the approach would have to be made to the Barbados International Business Association and then from there. And I suspect that in a number of other countries there will be a similar type of association, but I can't speak for other countries. And maybe Nicola can say something about the Bahamas.
Yes, thank you, Ben and Pam. And certainly for the Bahamas, this case, we have a very active and productive private sector who really work hand in hand with the Ministry of Financial Services and other ministries to get the work done. I think that it's in their best interest, and I think people and agents act in their best interest. And so, it doesn't even require a great deal of organization. We just have a very active center, and so you have the private participants who are on board and generate new ideas and push the government, and and so we in the Ministry of Financial Services see ourselves as sort of the ombudsman between private sector, working with them. Then you've got the regulators on the other hand, and so I think that I think as your centers develop, you'll see your private sector who and our BFSB, for example, is quite diverse, representing all areas of international business. We have our self-regulatory organizations such as BACO or our Institute of our Bankers Association or our accounting associations, for example, who any issue, they are on it, sometimes even before the government is on it. So I think as your center develops, you see the private sector, it's their profit, so they are involved. Back to the issue of the CFATF and the Secretariat issues, I think, in the Caribbean we do have the alphabet soup, but so does everybody else of organs. And I think the key is just better cooperation, better coordination. And so that's back to the initial thought that we had as to the matrix of where are these issues, who should we be talking to, and where is the issue housed within CARICOM, CEDA, or whomever else is out there, IDB in our region, and so we just need to know the coordination. I think needs to be a bit better. I think that as we do have a more formal structure that's properly staffed with experts in financial services to guide this process, we will see movement. I know certainly the issues that I spoke about. As I said, I pull those out of our notes from our first meeting that the Bahamas came to the meeting to let's move ahead with that. And certainly as we sought to chair the group, those are the issues that we sought to move as part of the platform and gain support for. But I think though, as we do get our secretariat in place, we will again pledge our support to moving these issues and others as the other new ones, which are just as important, come on, so that we get this group moving. And I think that's the key point. Next year, we don't want to have this discussion.
I'm also quite familiar with the way the different private sector organizations work in the Caribbean. I mean, no private sector funds the CARICOM Secretariat, for example. We rely on the EU and CARICOM governments to fund what we do. And I hate to be the killjoy here. I don't think we can be serious about the role that a secretariat driven and missioned to advance the cause of the international financial services sector across the region. I don't know that it could be sustainably funded unless really it is funded by the governments themselves.
Quickly, I want to support Don's point. I think it's well documented that BVI is in a fight of its life right now for its financial services industry. And the whole notion of the private sector and its support, while I think in jurisdictions like BVI, Cayman, Bahamas, there's a lot of national private sector organizations. Those private sector organizations work on a national basis. Mr. Matthews gave an example of some that work on an international basis, but in terms of what we're trying to achieve here, we're looking for a multi-jurisdictional approach. And I doubt very much, given what I've seen on the national side, that is even possible. There's reticence on the national side for private sector support, except outside of the well-established organizations. So I think we may be under some illusion if we believe that we're going to get wide private sector support for an initiative such as a secretariat. So I actually want to endorse Don's point.
With all due respect to the comments made, maybe I'm just completely off the wall. And I'm willing to admit that. My parents still think I'm retarded. And, and that's okay. My mom still looks at me oddly sometimes because she thought I wasn't supposed to go to school. But the point is, I don't agree, and I don't agree for this simple reason. CIC fell apart or has gone into dormancy because they did not produce what the private sector felt that they needed to get. I believe people pay when they see value. When you get value, you're willing to put money in. And I've seen that over and over and over in my career, in different elements of my career, over 27 years. I believe that if a secretariat produces and shows that it can produce value to the private sector will put money in. I am not saying it will be rivers of gold. But what I am saying is I believe that there will be those who will put funding in. And our initial analysis coming out of the recent study done by James Moss Solomon of the establishment of a Caribbean Business Council is very clear on that the private sector pulled out the major players from CAIC because they were not seeing value. They were not getting the advocacy. Why is it that WERSPA continues to be one of the best regional organizations? Money is pumped into WERSPA. Why? Because they see value. Money is pumped into the Caribbean Poultry Association. Why? Because they see value. When the private sector understands that they will receive value, they will put money in. That's where I come down on it. And I may be proven wrong, but that's the way I see it.
That's Pamela Koch Hamilton, the Executive Director of Caribbean Export, speaking towards the end of the just-held 3rd Caribbean International Financial Services Conference in Nassau in the Bahamas. This has been 630, a program brought to you in association with Sagicor. I'm David Ellis.